exciting.
Woo! Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
What up, friends?
Or is it gonna? Oh, okay. Maya, you got
Oh.
and Kennedy coming in with the camera.
Maya's up here in Portland with me. Hi, girl.
Oh, how do you guys know each other?
Through strategy. Yeah.
Oh, so she's gonna be like, that is not what strategists do.
Exactly.
Just kidding. Where did you guys work together?
She's more like a mentee, but we actually went to the same alternative high school. So yeah.
Oh, damn.
Alternative.
Yes.
Cute.
Hi,
Really.
Brenda.
Hello.
Hi, Jamie.
Mm-hmm. So I'm so curious if there are other strategists on the call.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then Sean also asked where you're coming from and what your Instagram handle is. Ooh wee. Okay.
Hi,
Chicago,
Genesis.
San Diego. Kat here. Hey, Kat. My mom is actually in Santa Fe right now.
Love your mom.
Strategist, but I kind of just accidentally fell into it. So I'm curious what the professionals have to say tonight.
Oh, wow. Like, do you work at an agency?
No, I was working with like an in-house marketing agency as an art director, and then a friend of mine who has an indie label was needing help with marketing strategy. And because I had the availability, I said, sure, why not? Like, I'm happy to just dive in and, help based on what I've kind of heard through the grapevine with, strategists that I've worked around. But it's definitely been like a like a trial and error process the last 7 months, but it's been really fun. I mean, I've definitely been able to turn the dial up for them, without
Cool.
training. But I'm really excited to hear what people that have been doing it, for much longer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, welcome, everybody. All
Media
right.
strategists. Okay, we got some strategists in here. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Hey,
that
Fred
you
from
need to.
Everyday Humans. How's it going?
Hi.
Oh my gosh, I have it all right here. It's so cute. Look at this packaging. Right?
Yes.
I haven't, the lips is my favorite. I like the one with cannabis in it.
Well, welcome, everybody. My name is Sean, and I'm the community curator for I Love Creatives. And this is our job directory strategist roundtable. And we have joining us Xander Tran from the Projects and Megan Amberson from Cry Less, Do More. And we also have Puno from I Love Creatives with us. And they're going to let you know today kind of what a strategist does. We're going to kind of like delve into how to approach strategy and content briefs. And we're also going to give you a pretty awesome PDF that Megan put together that will help you approach any sort of content brief moving forward. And so I would love to kind of give Xander a chance to kind of introduce himself and tell you all a little bit more about what he does.
Yeah, cool. So a little bit of background about myself. So my name is Xander Tran, and I'm a senior creative strategist with the Projects, as well as associate partner. And I'll say that I think every strategist or every person that kind of stumbles or finds their way into strategy probably has like a pretty unique background. For me, I'll say, how do I condense my story? I'll say after college, I'll start there. After college, I moved to Japan, worked there as an English teacher, did that for about a year, had some serious heartbreak issues, and decided to move from Osaka to Tokyo and pursue modeling, which is like super random. But that experience really immersed me in the culture of creativity and just being part of creative teams and seeing different groups of people bring a vision to life. that really inspired me to want to get on the other side of the lens and be involved in potentially a creative director role, photography, whatever that looks like. I then moved back to the States, did a host of jobs, from working in retail to visual merchandising to photography, kind of the gamut. And then one day I decided, if I'm a millennial, I really need to learn graphic design. And from there, I decided to apply for an internship at the Projects. And I started off as a graphic design intern. And that was about 5 years ago. And along that journey, I hustled really hard, and was promoted from junior creative strategist to creative strategist to senior creative strategist, where I'm at now, to receiving partnership in the business. So literally from intern to partner. And it's been a really wild journey, but I'll say that my experiences teaching abroad, my experiences even in modeling have really helped my work as a strategist, just in terms of how I perceive the world and also how I communicate. So yeah, that's just a little teaser about who I am. Yeah, I'm really excited and grateful to be here.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Should I go next, Sean?
Absolutely.
Great. Hi, I'm Megan Amberson. I'm up in Portland, Oregon, and my title is technically Director of Strategy or Strategy Director, but I own my own consultancy, so I'm sort of the person behind the scenes that does all of that. My background is also really diverse. I think I really got my start and passion was being around people. Puno always says that I love the heart. I'm always about the heart. So for me, it's about talking to different people and always wanting to do that. And I always did that as a kid and growing up. And then when I finally went to college, I took a cultural anthropology course, 101. And when I walked into that class, I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is my destiny. People who actually study other people and behavior and what they do and why, that just totally lit me up. And so going through that program, and I did all of that, and I did my thesis on Chinese street fashion at the time. There wasn't a lot of conversation around what Chinese youth were doing as identifiers before the Olympics, and I got really geeky about that and traveled all over China and interviewed kids. And so for me, when I got out of college, it was like, how do I make a living doing this same work? And there was sort of two avenues. You could either go academia or kind of get into the marketing communications realm. And I also had a friend, Patrick, who was doing the work, and I always was obsessed with his job and asking him all the time. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be what they used to call more of an account planner than a strategist. And I think that's important to note too. Strategist is more an encompassing label for what we all do over the last maybe 5 or 8 years. But before that, it was always like account planning. So anyway, I got my start in there. My first job was at Nike in their consumer cultures lab and did that. And then over my 13-year career, I've basically been in the big agencies and the small agencies. I had the chance to work with Xander at the Projects for almost a year. So that's kind of my background. I would say my passion for people. I love to interview and find out what people are into. And so that kind of got me my start. So that's my background.
Awesome. And how did you all three meet?
Oh man. Okay. So I used to be in advertising when 2006.
7.
Something around that.
And I met Megan first and as an interactive or as an art director at DDB, the agency. And I had no idea what a strategist was. But all the cool people were strategists, like straight up people who were like the most interesting that you could have hours of conversation with. They were all strategists. And I remember meeting Megan for the first time and she had some Hello Kitty tutu on or something like that. And I was like, who is this girl? She's gonna be my friend. But Megan and I worked together on a lot of Activision stuff, and I have to say, I just learned so much from Megan and how she thinks. I would almost argue that strategists are user experience designers as well, because they're the ones that like user experience designers are the ones who create the wireframes and the blueprints for UI designers and developers. And so in a way, strategists do the same thing for creatives. And at the time I was an art director. So they would give us the brief and they would give us the insights, and they'd be the people that would tell us and inspire us on like how to talk to these customers better, how to create better ideas that are actually impactful. And so we'll talk about a bunch of stories as well about her approach. But then Xander, my God, I met him in downtown LA.
Yes.
You were just like, this was right before
I worked at the projects. I was working at the Well in downtown, like at a retail shop. I had like, I don't know if back then, but I had blonde hair, like bleached eyebrows, shaved head, whatever, trying to be really edgy. And like Puno walks in, I'm like such a stan from I Love Creatives, and I'm just like, I know this girl, I know what she does, I'm all about it. And actually at that time, I'm remembering correctly now, like I was actually doing my internship at the projects. I was using, you had a course about like social media strategy. And as part of my internship, we had this like project, and my project was to come up with the social strategy for our agency. And I used your course materials to really develop and really write like my first deck. And, this is me being a graphic designer, showing this to our global head of strategy. And at that point, she was like, wow, like you shouldn't be a designer. You're a horrible designer. You should actually be a strategist. And that's how I got hired. So really, I owe it to you, Puno, for creating, like helping me get a job. But yeah, I met you at that store, and then you introduced me to Megan via email because I was looking for some people to work with. And I remember Megan, me and you, I think we had lunch at some like hip spot in Silver Lake. And I Botanica. That's
because
right.
I was like, I want to go.
Yeah. And then like Megan had like blue eyeshadow and just like ripped jeans and like a chain. And we just like really connected. And then the next week we went to Atlanta and did some brand work for Porsche. And it was super fun, but thankful for the connections. Yeah.
Yeah. It's awesome because strategists, I feel like in general, are very curious people. And so you're always into something. So I feel like our catch-ups are always like our minimum. Like we cannot fit it all in there. But I'm so glad that I know you guys and that you've just blossomed so much into this role and have really changed it based on like what you're seeing with culture, how to communicate better with creatives, with clients. So I'm going to be really stoked to like share what this role is with other people because it's such an interesting role and an impactful one.
For sure.
Yeah, I think I wanted to also like just second that, Puno, because right now as the economy is changing and we're sort of looking forward to like what is the workforce going to be like in the next 5 years, whether you have a job as a strategist, the requirement to be more strategic is absolutely critical to help both your own personal development, but also like business in general. How are we going to make a better world really comes from strong thinking. And at the end of the day, that's all really strategy is. So I just want to acknowledge that strategy is probably one of the most important disciplines as we sort of look through forward and figure out how are we going to change this world we're in and make some different choices. So I just want to add that.
And that actually leads me into like one of our first talking points, and a big reason why we wanted to do the strategist job as one of our first job directory roundtables is that, a lot of people want to work at an agency or they want to kind of have a job working in the creative field, but they don't realize that there's a lot of different components to that. So I would love to just maybe start by asking, what exactly does a strategist do?
Do you want to kick off, Xander?
Sure, why not? I like to be on the spot. More like textbook definition, because I think it's good to start from there. Strategy, it depends. So if you work at a large marketing or advertising agency or smaller, there's a difference between the two. I'll say at a larger one, traditionally, you'll have multiple departments, like the accounts team, which is responsible for liaising directly with the client, and project management. You'll have the creative department, which is, which is full of copywriters, creative directors, designers. These are the people who take the ideas and really bring them to life. And then you might have production, who is more the execution side of the business. And then you have the strategy department. And so within that, the strategists are particularly responsible for researching the ways in which audiences interact with messages, trends, cultural movements, and then help explain how or where a company might fit into that cultural narrative. So they are responsible for the research, the insights, and also the roadmap in responding to a brief. And then they take that work and hand that over to a creative team, copywriters, designers who build upon that. I'll say that's more of the traditional, and Megan can definitely speak to this. At a larger agency, you'll experience that kind of distinction between departments. Where I work is a little bit more independent and boutique and smaller. And I know at startups, people say we wear multiple hats, but really in smaller agencies, you tend to see strategists and creatives merge into one. So often in my role, I am not only doing the research and the insights, I'm also coming up with the idea as well as building it out into detail. Sometimes it gets annoying because you wish you had more resources, but I think, it's a good way of flexing your skill set and like moving into different mindsets. But yeah, at the start, it's kind of organized in those two different ways. Megan, would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I think being a strategist can happen in lots of different places, right? So Xander's talked about the boutique agency and then also referenced that bigger agency, and I've had the privilege to work in both. And then I think there's also, looking at brand side, so say Coca-Cola. They also have strategists on staff who are usually on an insights team or research team, things like that. So they're all sort of in there. And then there's just folks that just kind of work independently and develop client direct strategy as well. So basically strategy at the core is thinking, it's understanding the information as Xander's talked about, whether it's the audience, the culture, the product. It's really just understanding the why behind it to inspire great marketing, but also inspire great brands to do good things. So yeah. I think one of the best ways to go back is to reference a project Puno and I did together way back in the day, last gazillion years ago, but we had a brief from Activision, and it was a Marvel versus Capcom video game. And you had something like 50 action heroes from comic books that everyone loved. And our job was to figure out a marketing campaign for that, especially that launched at Comic-Con. And my job, I was like, well, wait a minute, Puno. The insight we came to was like comic book geeks love to talk about comic books, and they love to debate and battle characters' abilities and so on. And from that, we really developed a creative idea, which ended up being an actual real world debate. But I think that's an example of just strategist's job is to know what's happening in the world and be able to take that information and synthesize it and make really good work, whether that's for a brand or an agency or just, great policy as well. There's lots of strategists, but it's basically just really strong informed thinking that can lead an idea forward.
Yeah, and I think too, it's about being able to examine and look at culture and find those universal truths about human behavior, and then create ideas that build off of that so that the work that you're putting forward feels intuitive for the audience. And I think so much of good strategy is really about empathy. And so, to your point, whether you're doing a thing for video games or whatever that might be, it's being able to put yourself in the driver's seat of your audience and understanding like what they care about, what's interesting to them, what their life is like, and then creating work that speaks to that in a really honest way. So that honestly, that makes strategy really fun, because based off of whatever the brief might be, like your job is to essentially become an overnight expert in whatever industry that is. And that comes through, like Megan, when you're talking about your background, like comes through curiosity and just talking to strangers. And I remember when I started off as a junior strategist, like I would Uber to work every day because I don't have a car. And I would always bring my briefs to my Ubers. and like talk to every driver, whether it was a brief about female gamers or just areas that I wasn't an expert in, and just ask them like frank questions, and then bring those conversations and thinking into the actual work.
And I think also I wanted to add, some of our audience may be actual small brands or people who are trying to launch their own products. And I think when you think about great strategy and you're building something from the beginning, it's really how are we going to be most effective with our idea and really figuring out how to get that forward. So, you know, whether it's a TV spot or you're just trying to figure out how to launch this beloved product that you've been developing, like it's really just the thinking behind it and making sure that you're always right about what's true to humans. I think we've all seen really bad ads that just are like, whoa, what were they thinking? That's so off the mark. And that's always an indicator to me that there wasn't any strategy going on. They just made something. So I think it's just really the simplest form. It's the really great thinking informed by curiosity behind anything, which is also vague and specific. So apologies for that. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that I always liken strategy with UX design just because it's so important for you as a strategist to not just like understand a new industry, but like really become passionate about it. Because until you do that, you're going to miss out on all these like great, beautiful nuances in this culture that you wouldn't know about. So for example, are we going to talk about this later, or the Call of Duty stuff, Megan, or?
Should talk about it now. Yeah.
Okay. Well, no, let's just wait. But anyways,
We'll
there's a lot of like, I think if like just repeating what Xander said, if you love devouring new ideas or new communities or new cultures really quickly, you will love this job.
Yeah.
It's just that, because that is the requirement, is you have to do that. And you need to do it on your days off too. Like your Google search results are just supposed to be crazy and interesting because that's just who you are. So
yeah, I mean, to that point, I'll say part of the job of a strategist is not doing your job, which is being off the clock and living your life, interacting with people, just exploring and just experiencing the world. And for me, like, you know, I lived in LA for a very long time, and I had a very specific worldview based off of that. And I just remember every time I would come home to the Bay Area to hang out with my older sister, who is not like me. She has a 1-year-old son, like a very suburban lifestyle, and she's like watching This Is Us. Like for me, like it's so helpful to like see how she views the world and like what excites her and what she cares about. And it's just a different point of view, but it's important to use your life and like what you observe as insights and information to inform your work. It's not just what you're doing 9 to 5.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think I get a lot of times people ask me, like, how do you stay current? What are the tools? What are your favorite books to become a strategist? And really, like, it's go to the movies, it's be in the world. Like, our jobs are really special because our job is just to be in the world and be asking people questions and look at the grocery like situation. I look in people's carts. Every time I'm at the grocery store, I'm like, what is she getting? Ooh, and then I try, like I can't help it. Like I'm obsessed with understanding people and why they do things. And I think that's one of the best parts of the job is it's really a hard job to like learn like a textbook from. It's really about being curious, being like totally open to talking to anybody. And just being willing to put yourself out there, which isn't, for everyone, but for people like Xander and, others and I, that we love talking. So obviously we're here, but I think it's just really important to like remember that strategists get their fuel from the world and from culture and from digital culture. So there's no way to like ever give anyone the book that will help explain it all. So I wanted to call that out.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I guess like the next question that we wanted to kind of go over was, What work experience do you guys think you need to be a strategist? Because right now it's sounding a little vague. It's like,
I think that's important. I think both Xander and I actually have a lot of history and jobs with retail, customer service, being in like selling things to people, bagging groceries. So I think the jobs that are most important are anything that's like customer service, anything that's curiosity and research based, being able, I always feel like even as far along as I am in my job, in my career, I always have homework. Who knows, right? Like it's like I've always got homework. So it's really as far as like what it takes to be one and how to get in there and the kind of jobs, it's like curiosity, tenacious, being really relentless about finding out information. But I know strategists that were comedians. I know strategists like the qualities that are shared among us are really the fact that we like people and like to talk to people and are curious, but our jobs come from all over. I mean, before I went to college, I was a professional nanny, and, you know, raised other people's kids for a living. So that did help me when it came to agency life, because I knew how to deal with hungry, sad people who needed a snack. So like, whatever it is, like, you know, like it's the ability. So I want anyone who's listening and watching to understand, you may not have a cultural anthropology degree, but you can still be a strategist if you're excited by people, love to go to concerts, love to ask people questions. Like that's really the ingredients that are necessary. So sometimes people think there's a formal track, and that's kind of the most frustrating and exciting part of the job, is there isn't one way to do it. You just have to like people and be curious and be really okay with lots of homework all the time.
And I love what David says here about a former strategist at Google who was amazing strategist at Google who was a former professional clown. Mm-hmm. Clowning is such an incredible experience to draw from. But just to piggyback off of what Megan said, I think there's no like clear track to being a strategist. So unfortunately, that's kind of a non-answer. But to me, it's like whatever, you know, work that you're doing that involves curiosity, I think a way into strategy is actually through writing. Mm-hmm. So for example, like if you want to be a strategist, I think every good strategist has to know how to write well. In terms of, because we spend a lot of time pulling together pitches and proposals and like telling cohesive stories, and writing is the core skill of that. And so if you are a professional clown, or if you're a comedian or a former model in Japan, whatever that is, if you can craft a narrative, like you can be a strategist. Mm-hmm. And, you know, my recommendations for people wanting to kind of to dip their toes or try to position themselves as strategists is start with writing. And, you know, there are lots of publications out there that analyze and write about culture. And it's not easy, but it's possible to pitch them ideas, and then, you know, you can do a cultural thought piece or write an article analyzing, you know, street culture in Beijing, whatever that is. And to me, it's like pulling to, like, you know, you're in a way, you're going to be able to build a portfolio and show like your breadth of thinking and level of cultural analysis. If you're focused on culture, maybe it's data that you're more focused on, whatever that is for you. I think writing is a core skill to getting your way into strategy. And then also like look around like your network and your friends, and think about all the people in your circle who are just trying to create or start things. Whether those are people who are building brands or, you know, starting a social media account, whatever that is, and like offer yourself as a resource to help develop and build strategies for them so that you can develop a body of work. And to what Puno said earlier is that, and also Megan, there's really no textbook for strategy. So, you know, pulling a deck together or pulling a strategic plan together, like I wish there was, but there isn't like a clear guideline of how to do that. Oftentimes we're making it up, and we're experimenting and we're trying new things and we're refining our approach. And so, I guess my advice is just get scrappy.
And I think like one of the best things you can do is be able to communicate an idea really precisely. So like, I know I keep talking about UX design, but I think there's a lot of parallels with that. And the way that I got that job was not actually from like, I didn't, there was no UX design school because it just like the Apple iPhone just came out. So this is all like brand new. At the time it was like architecture, information architecture. But the person that asked me to apply was like, I just need to know how you think and what your reasoning was. And if you could just make a 10-page PowerPoint slide about, it was actually a Call of Duty project that we worked on, and just explain it. I know it has nothing to do with you building an app or anything like that, but I need to just know that you know how to think, or that you are coming from an unbiased place, or your intentions are what. And so I had to do that. I wouldn't have considered myself a good writer, but he even told me that I was a good writer because when you talk to me, it's the same, or when you read my writing, it's the same as how I talk. And it's different types of writing. It's not like trend journal writing. This is the goal of a strategist, is to communicate to many parties as simply and precisely as possible, while also inspiring them. So if you are writing like really editorial or like marketing speak, that's not the type of copywriter I feel like you guys are kind of thinking about. It's more, we need to communicate this audience's perspective. We need to communicate the creatives thinking behind this. We need to communicate the client's thinking behind this, versus like a lot of vocabulary.
No, I think that's really important, because I think at the end of the day, if I ever had criticisms from bosses, it was always like, just show me your thinking, explain your thinking. And that was, when my early days, that was really hard, because I wasn't sure if it was right, or if I didn't have that confidence. And it really took what Puno's talking about, which is just like jumping in and being like, here it is. These are the 5 reasons why people should, do this. And then, this is why. And then you've taken all that information that you've read and been in the world, and you take it and you go like this. And that's sometimes kind of sad, because you're like, oh my gosh, I spent 4 weeks on this and it comes down to a paragraph.
Yeah.
But that is the gold, because then somebody takes that paragraph and then they go off. And I think, for a reference for you all to understand the simplicity and why it matters so much, I worked on a Super Bowl ad. I can't even remember, maybe 14, was with Clint Eastwood. It was for Chrysler. And, at that time, the client was like, hey, we're going to have everyone in America watching this ad. What do we do to inspire people? And a strategic example of that was like, okay, well, we went out and we're like, people are feeling kind of down. The economy's struggling. Like, things are feeling rough. So the brief and the strategy for that Super Bowl ad was literally like, how do we write a love letter to America? And that was it. And then the creatives were like, oh my gosh, that gave them space. But to understand that the simplicity of that assignment really came from so much research and so much understanding. But to Puno's point, it was drilling it down and making it as simple as possible. And that's when great things happen, because then the greatness can come, because you've kind of like it's a runway is a good way of describing it. It's like you build the runway and then other people go forward off of that. So it's really just being simple and strong and being honest, which is hard when you're young and you're in your career. You're like, I don't know, do I really know the answer? I had a lot of insecurity in my early days for that. So it just took me doing it enough to figure out that, like, no, people, this is good. I got this. I'm solid. So,
well, you guys both have hired teams of strategists. Like, what would be the number one question you would, you would ask that would be like,
I have 2. One, I always ask everyone what their superpower is. I'm always curious. That's always quite revealing. And then my second question is normally like, on a Sunday, what are you doing? I mean, this is pre-pandemic here, let's assume. But like, to me, I'm always curious, like what people do on their off time. And, you know, it's just how, you know, if someone's like, oh, like I like to, you know, go to the beach and whatever it is, like, you know, kind of run of the mill things versus like, oh, like I'm a club demon and I like to like be at the warehouse until 4 a.m. or, oh, I'm people watching, you know, over here or whatever that is. Like, to me, like those are always more interesting because I'm just curious in people having those like natural instincts to just live and be immersed in culture. So that's usually my priority.
Yeah, I think I kind of riffing off that. My question is, are you comfortable going up to a stranger and asking them a question? Because at the end of the, I mean, everyone has their sort of technique, but for me, that's been the one that like has been my tried and true, which is like, you put me in any, you put me at a gun show, I can talk to everybody. I can ask enough questions and try to, even though I'm not really into guns, but I think what's behind that is, are you curious about everything? Like, that's what I'm hoping a good strategist on my team will answer, because if they have that, then we're unstoppable. Like, you know, we can go into anything. Cause I think that's the other thing is being in this world, like you're going to get assignments that sometimes conflict with your morals. I worked on a car account for 5 years and didn't have a car and rode my bike everywhere. But for me, that was, you know, you got to get geeky and be really into it. So
Yeah, and I will say too, like, and this is kind of a tangent, but like, if you are not the actual audience or the user of a specific product, like I'm not a wine drinker, I've done a lot of work with alcohol brands, whatever that is. But I use that as a strength because I have an objective point of view. And so I do the research, I have the conversations, but I'm still approaching things from an objective and also cynical point of view. And the reality is that, you know, culture, audiences, and how they interact with brands and messages do come from a place of cynicism. So I think it's healthy to question things a lot and be skeptical. I don't think it's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, so going off of that, what do you feel is, on top of the being curious and being open, what's the most important quality you think that a strategist should have? I'll start because I feel like I think it's humbleness is like top, because I mean, like Megan and I have worked together on a lot of different projects, and for example, the Call of Duty one, and I had never played Call of Duty before. I was not like, I didn't even know what first person shooter was before I worked on it. But Megan was like, okay guys, so I found a Call of Duty player. He's gonna let us into his home. We're gonna have some pizza and we're gonna play games with him. And then like my partner and I were like, that's tight. Like what? And then we ended up like just going to this 18-year-old's house with like all of his friends. And they were just like, yeah, this is how we play game. It was like in this shitty apartment and
in the valley.
In the valley, but she was like, you were so down with them. We all became friends at the end. It wasn't awkward. And I think because there's this genuine like humbleness and curiosity, and it's not this like, okay, lab rat, like tell us everything about Call of Duty. And I mean, even for me, like that made me really appreciate the game in a different way. And just in general, just realizing I don't know everything, but if I just kind of like take my ego out of it, you can really be super inspired. And we did a lot of fun things because of that. So that was like huge for me, was that lesson.
Well, and I'd like to like, just to kind of build on that train. So we ended up going into, you know, first person shooters houses and talking to them and hanging out. But Puno and I ended up doing, we had talked about the fact that fraternities were a great place for gaming. Like everyone's at home, they play games. So we ended up doing this huge project where we went all over the UCLA campus, interviewing frat houses about gaming. And then that ended up going to the company, and then they sort of took that information and like really thought differently about that kind of community. So to me, that's kind of like the line of what we do. It's like, well, let's go talk to a real gamer. And the end of that line is Activision actually being like, wow, there's some really interesting audience insights from this. So that to me, that's great strategy where you have the humbleness to say, I don't know what I know. I don't know. And then the diligence to go do the work, and then be able to, our other earlier point, communicate it back to people. Because we probably couldn't take an Activision exec to this house, but we definitely have to take the learnings we got there and bring that into the brand and be able to help them understand why it's going to help their business.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I'll add 2 points that I think are in terms of qualities that are really important just to build off of that. It's that humbleness, but also realizing that like when you are on calls, you know, with clients and it's like, you know, maybe it's 10 people or 15 people on a call, like oftentimes what is happening is pure groupthink. And a lot of assumptions are made and a lot of things are said around KPIs or goals or whatever that is. A great strategist will always ask why and not just accept any answer on face value. So and this isn't the takeaway sheet, but if, you know, a strategist is saying, or if a client says, oh, I want a campaign to go viral. Okay, why? What does that mean? Like explain like what your goals are for that. And when you have the humbleness to ask questions that you feel aren't smart or are dumb, like that actually helps to clarify everyone's understanding of what you're working on. And that's really important as a strategist, is to always ask why and be shameless and relentless in that. And then the second thing I think is really important beyond curiosity and listening and empathy is diligence, and also a commitment to just putting something on the page. Because there are so many times in work situations or in groups of teams where it's easy for people to blurt or express their ideas or their thinking or like a seed of a thought, but never actually carry it forward and build it out. And for me, like it could be a deck, whatever it is, I always start strategy on a blank sheet of paper. Even before I move it to a deck, I will write the entire story, proposal, insights, whatever it is. I'll write it out first. And I commit to that process of creating, you know, my thinking, whether that's a story or creative, whatever that is. I refine it, I edit, I simplify it, and then I share it with my colleagues and really pressure test it with them. And I know someone kind of talked about how do you deal with your own implicit bias? And I think, you know, when you share your thinking with other people and ask them, you know, what resonates, what's missing, and allow them to really poke holes in the work, that's how you really evolve the thinking. But it doesn't happen unless you put something down on the page. And a lot of people have that fear of fully expressing themselves or writing their ideas down because they've never done it before. They don't know what it's going to look like. Trust your intuition. It's going to be messy. Write it out. And you know, Puno talks about really simple, beautiful, clear ideas and communication. That's the end result. The beginning is always really messy. And if I could show you the behind the scenes of like what my decks, how they actually start, or if my culture reports, whatever that is, like it is a collection of screenshots and, you know, notes that I take in my iPhone, and all like gathered from all these different places. But yeah, I think it just starts with that commitment to just getting it down on the page.
Yeah, I think the humbleness is a really important one. And to your point, Xander, the process makes you humble because it takes work to get to that simplicity, and that requires a lot of like diligence. But the humbleness also really comes into play depending on where you are a strategist. So I worked at Wieden & Kennedy for 5 years, and you know, it's a well-known agency, and it's really known for being creatively very strong. So the creative is very smart. But as a strategist, that was really hard. There were 700 people in that agency, and there was only 10 of us. And we were the ones, the machine behind it. But the creatives got the credit. Creatives got the awards. Creatives got, honestly, the pay, all of that. But without us behind the scenes, a lot of that work wouldn't have happened. And I think you have to be okay with that. And I think that's changing, and definitely places like the projects are way more equal. Everyone respects both creative and strategy in the same way, but there is an older construct that really thinks, okay, strategy, you've given us the brief, now it's time to go, we're going to do the magic. But that can be really hard on your like little ego, because you're like, wait a minute, like hey guys, that's me, but you don't
Yeah.
often get that credit. So I think being okay with being behind the scenes and being humble and knowing you did a great job is just something you have to own on yourself. So that's just an example of like a big agency. And it's not to say Wieden & Kennedy didn't appreciate strategy, they did, but it's not the thing. You're not seeing the awards necessarily. Of course there are awards for it, but I don't know, it requires that humbleness. But Xander's absolutely correct. It's messy, it's ugly, there's tears. That's why my company is called Cry Less, Do More, because, you know, there was a lot of tears to kind of figure it all out. And I think that's a really important part of the process, is just knowing it's messy, but you're going to get there and it's going to be fun. And when you share that with thinking with people, you're going to feel amazing, because they're going to be like, oh my gosh, I never thought about it that way. And that's the payoff. It's not the awards. It's like the payoff of people understanding how you think and what your ideas are, that really feels good. So again, to answer your question, I think humbleness is pretty critical quality.
So in terms of, before we move on to the brief that Megan put together, I just had one quick question. Is there, like with art directors, copywriters, there's obviously, you have to come in with a portfolio. Is there anything like standard that strategists must have before they apply?
Yeah, I was going to touch on this because I think some of the questions came in that were about, how do I get into this? How do I get a strategy job? How do I present myself? And really, again, it's all about your thinking. So for instance, I always presented decks that were, I love to take photos. So I would present my thinking through photography decks, and then really bring in insights like that. When I say decks presentation, having websites and things helps, but at the end of the day, it's not useful unless someone knows how you think. Show me how you think. What was the idea behind this? So when you're thinking about putting a portfolio together to pitch for a job or put on a website, think about just what was the thinking behind it, and then some sort of result of that is a really important part too, is being able to show that thinking was great and it did something, whatever that intention was, whether that was sell something, go viral, anything like that. So I think that's a really important piece. And the other part of that is, it doesn't have, there's no textbook. So make it your own, be yourself, because to Puno's very first point, strategists are kind of weirdos. Like, we are the kids behind the high school. Like, we're usually like the ones thinking things through, and like, you know, people like us because we're the odd ones, and that's great for us because we can be our weird selves and still have incredible work. But I think that's the other thing, is just be yourself. Like, I love Hello Kitty. I love street fashion. I always bring as much of that as I can into stuff. Even if I'm talking about something like Coca-Cola or a car, just to be able to show the thinking. Not that I mix Hello Kitty with cars. That's
Dream. Okay, so do you want to talk about the brief?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of talk about sort of like what we do. And I'm sorry to use quotations, but it's really important because people will use terminology like the brief, and you're like, what is a brief? I was in my career, I was like, what is that? Trying to Google it and couldn't figure it out. It's really just the assignment in its truest form. So Xander talked about asking tough questions. So that's one of the pieces of this process, but there's 4 steps, and this will be in your takeaway. But the first thing is, the brief is what we are sort of responsible for. It's the map, it's the guidebook, it's the assignment, the homework assignment for whatever we're doing. And that could be internal. Somebody says to you, hey, can you do a comms plan? Or we need to launch this. Can you get that plan together? Can you write the brief? The creative team needs to know the assignment. And a lot of times clients will give you a brief, and it's always very informative, but it's also pretty straight-laced. So your job is to really sort of take all the information you have to sort of start that assignment. I think when we think about, we've talked a lot about the process and what happens and what we do and how it's all different and messy, but I think at the end of the day, you have to, I think Puno mentioned this, clear your minds of what you think you know about the thing or the project or how to do something. You kind of have to start very clear, because otherwise you won't come at it from an objective point of view. So you kind of have to be like, I don't know what Coca-Cola tastes like. I wonder, and kind of go back in that sort of way. The second thing is important, whether you're a brand or working at a brand or an agency, is making room for your client or the people you're working on behalf of to really have a conversation. And Xander nailed it. You have to be the one to ask really tough questions. So someone's asked you to do a brief, you're like trying to gather all the information. Your job is to get all that stuff together. But to do that, you have to get really deep and accurate. You have to ask clients things like, what are you scared of? What's your worst fear on this project? Have you tried things that didn't work? What are you excited about? What's the result you want? It's a little like intro to therapy. You have to like get very deep into like the behind the scenes, because otherwise you won't be effective. So that's really pushing, and Xander called it out. There's no such thing as a stupid question when you're a strategist, because everyone in the room will just go ahead and be like, oh, sounds great. Okay, let's get going. And you're like, wait a minute, we don't even know what we're doing. Yeah. Like, pause. And you have to be the person in there that really has the guts to say, team, we don't know what we're doing. We need information. And then to go through that is asking those tough questions. I think number 3 is really important, which is sort of, this is tricky because we're all humans. We have bias, we have issues, we have stereotypes, but right now we're at a great cultural moment to really like open the doors, be honest. And for me, myself over my career, I had the challenge of, wow, that sounds really sexist. Can I say something? Wow, dude, that's really racist. What are you up to? Like, really being able to like be honest, not necessarily attacking people, but being really clear that the reason marketing can come across as lame, derogatory, all the mistakes that we hear and see about is because nobody in the room said, that looks a little weird to have her on all fours with a leash. Like, do we want to do that? And that requires, again, a lot of confidence to be able to say, I'm really concerned we're coming off in the wrong way here. This isn't the goal to be either sexist or racist. And these are extreme examples, but I feel very strongly that our job as strategists is to represent the right thinking and the right approach forward. So we have to be really accountable to our own bias, but also call people out on it as well. So that is a tough one, but that's kind of that internal process. Maybe you won't say, hey, client, you seem kind of like you're off the ball and you are, I've worked in industries that absolutely don't respect their consumers. They don't respect the people who buy their thing. And that's my job, is say, hey, these are really interesting people. Yeah, they may live somewhere you don't, but they're still interesting. So I think that third point is really asking the tough questions and then challenging the team and yourself to really go against the bias you bring to it. And then the fourth one I want to make sure, because we need to get to questions, is really just about, you write the brief, you got everyone on board, everyone knows what's happening, then your job is to hold them accountable. This is where the nanny skills come back in. You'll be like, no, homework, remember, this is what we're doing. And then when you're able to do that, the work gets really great. But it will go off the rails. And again, you'll have to be the person that isn't the most popular to say, hey, I think we're losing our focus here, and kind of bring everyone back. So there's a lot more in the takeaway document that we're going to share with you. So I just wanted to kind of go over some big important things, especially when we're talking about bias and really trying to create a more equitable world. It's really critical that us as marketers or people who are within these brands of influence, that we really hold people accountable to ideas that are not positive for humanity and all. And I sound so heavy, but it's just, we have to be the conscience sometimes. And that's really an important role, and really, really valuable. So just wanted to add that part. So that's kind of the brief, and there's more in there, but we want to get to questions. So.
And thank you so much for creating that document. It's awesome. Yeah. I'm excited for everyone to see it. And thank you to the audience for sharing such great questions. We had the chance to go through them prior to the event, and there was a lot of awesome, really insightful questions. So during this portion, our awesome panelists are going to go through different categories that we basically were able to break these questions into. And they have a pretty interesting way that they're going to be selecting which questions they answer. So Puno, do you want to start us off?
You hear that? So yes, I have a fishbowl here of questions. Gonna pick something, one of these questions here. Okay. Put this right here. Okay. Content strategy. What's the difference? So throw that over there. So yeah, okay. So Xander and Megan are strategists that are in advertising or boutique creative agencies. But then there's also content strategists, which there's actually somebody, I believe, that was in the chat that's also a content strategist. And then there's also brand strategists as well. So, you know, brand strategists are typically helping in the beginning, shaping up your brand. They might not have a brief, but they sure do ask a lot of questions a lot of times. But it's really about, like, sometimes brand strategists, I find, are also designers. And so they're the ones who are going to, like, take everything, every thought, every inspiration that the client has and put it into brand guidelines or a deck or some way to communicate, like, what is the brand and what isn't the brand. Content strategists, I find, are more in the social space, and typically are figuring out, like, what are you going to be posting on Instagram and or YouTube or Pinterest or any social platform. And I feel like, you know, they're also typically the people who are doing it as well. So, like, a social media strategist would also probably help with content, but like Xander said, it really just depends on how big the company is. Do they have enough money to, like, have these siloed, you know, titles and departments? But yeah, I mean, overall, I feel like strategy from the advertising world is definitely more, I find more about, and you guys actually, I'd love for you to argue with me on this one, because this is just my perception as a creative in an agency. But I felt like it was about bigger campaigns, and less about, like, the day-to-day, like, what are we going to be posting? So the approach always had a little bit more time and were a bit more, they were like larger shifts or larger campaigns to communicate a message that was going to have lots of dollars behind it. Whereas content strategist has to do, like, the day-to-day communication that, to me, brings a bit more brand loyalty a lot of times, because you're literally on the ground always talking. In terms of, like, how you would communicate content strategy to your creatives or to yourself if you're that person, I think that a lot of people are doing very similar things. I hope that content strategists talk to their audience members and inundate themselves, and it's actually a lot easier now because of Instagram. And they don't necessarily come up with a brief, like a creative brief, but I find that really good content strategists tend to they do have a deck that talks about, like, what the overall strategy should be, what the thinking is behind that. So there's a lot of similarities, but I think the difference is what they have to execute at the end of the day, and how do they have to communicate that and who they have to communicate that with. What do you guys think?
I completely agree. I think ideally content strategists and brand strategists work together, because the content should really build off that bigger strategy. But I think I'd like to give a shout out to content strategists, because you all are really in the weeds all the time, and really you're usually in production too. So you're not you don't necessarily have the luxury to be like thinking about culture. You're like, I'm in it, and there's like so much production and need to get this post up. So I think ideally they work together, but yeah, I think they're more in the specifics, and in a way they're closer to people in the sense of the community they're working with, the audience. But I think the woman, I wish I knew her name. She does the InStyle Instagram account. She's incredible. I don't know if she calls herself a content strategist, but that woman is incredible. She is really good at keeping things going, and keeping the stories interesting. So I think you're right. They're a different kind of strategist, but they bring that thinking, but more in like the day-to-day, got to get this up, got to get it out. What are people reacting to? Whereas a brand strategist is more like, okay, how are we going to put this all over the globe? So there's that difference.
And by the way, not to derail things, but I'm having like this Mike Pence fly moment. It's like literally like won't stop. So I'm just like, okay, it's here. All right, we're doing this. But to piggyback off, I mean, I agree with all that. There's multiple ways to define strategy, and I think like to your point, Puno, like brand strategy is more macro, where you're focusing on how a brand shows up in the world and what the brand's communication is and what their positioning is, and defining who their audience might be and how to get there. And then content might be a little bit more micro, where you're focusing on like what's the actual content and stories and editorial approach, whatever that might be. And then there's creative strategists or experiential strategists who are building experiences, and digital strategists. It's all there's multiple ways to define it.
Yeah, but I think it's really the thinking behind the effort is the strategy thread between all of it. So, and it all comes from knowing what people want and what they're going to be excited about and stuff like that. So,
yeah, I find with content strategists, the best ones always are looking out. They are tapped in so hard that you're just like, what is that? They are Urban Dictionary. And I think they have a pulse on the audience because they're not afraid to talk to people and have weird conversations with people on Instagram. Those are the ones that I'm like, yeah, cool. Well, I think it's Megan, it's your turn.
Yeah, sure is, for questions.
Well, let me just hand off the jar to you.
All right, let's do time portal.
Here you go.
Oh,
that's time.
LA, Oregon. Good
Wow,
job, girl.
this is awesome.
Da-da-da-da.
I love this new world we live in where things can morph like Star Trek.
Thanks, Kate. Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Casual. That wasn't planned.
This question is a good one. What's the biggest challenge for multicultural audiences? And I want to acknowledge, I am not multicultural in that sense. So I'm coming at it from a Caucasian perspective. But I do think it's really, this is a really great question. And I was excited to see it because typically what happens is like the strategy team is trying to create this universal truth that everyone will understand. And then a big brand will say, well, we've got our multicultural team over here and we'll need to get them to weigh in. And that is a really big problem because to me, there should be none of that. It should be, everyone should be considered and every idea should be communicated in language and where it shows up in the right way. So when I think about clients discussing like, well, what about our multicultural audience? I always want to say like, that doesn't make any sense. Like we're all people, but how people, the languages they consume things through, the platforms, things like that can be global. But I think the challenge is just trying to get to the truth of like, this audience matters. So it's tricky. How do we be inclusive while also saying, hey, let's not only talk to white America? So I think there's just some really interesting things there. So to answer your question, I think you always have to really fight for the people you want to be represented and the people you want to receive the idea and make sure that it shows up in the best way. And sometimes business doesn't do that naturally. So as the strategist, you have to help them understand that all people are important, whether they live in Arkansas or New York City. and whether they speak English or they don't. So I hope that helps that person on that question. But I think that's a really important one, is how do you create that accountability when there's a concept of multicultural?
And I think too, one kind of secret strategy that I have for dealing with that is I do a lot of casting when it comes to like influencer campaigns. And I will often, if I'm casting a campaign, I will make it majority POC and add in maybe one person who is Caucasian. And the thing is, like, clients will never want to explicitly be racist or say, oh, we actually need more white people. So first off, start from that, like, not lopsidedness, but start from a place of, you know, where campaigns are traditionally majority Caucasian with like a token Black person. Sorry, Mike Pence fly. Flip that, and then you kind of corner the client into either having to express their racist beliefs, or like, you know, you're creating a different like starting place, right? So yeah, I find that to be sneaky, but honestly really helpful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Should I do one more? Do you have time, Sean?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. My favorite one. How do you ensure sell-through? So this is so good and such a geeky thing to be excited about. But I think what this question is, how do you make sure that the thing you've spent all this time developing and working on actually goes forward, which is, I think, the question they're asking. And I think you have to be dogged. You have to be vigilant, and you have to keep on it. You can, until it's in the world in the way you want it, you have to remain very dedicated to seeing the thing through. And sometimes you just want to give up because it seems hopeless. But I think ensuring sell-through really means the idea is communicated well, everyone's on board, and that you're able to make sure that people haven't forgotten how important it is. So I think that's just a tenacity challenge. So you just have to keep on it. I don't know, Xander, how do you kind of approach that?
Oh, I agree 100%. It's all about tenacity. Yeah.
Cool. All right, Xander, you're up next.
Oh God, here we go. Oh no, my Wi-Fi is not that strong. Wait, I think my internet's glitching. What
Oh, look at you.
I have no idea. Okay, so
Double magic.
I get an antique box. I don't know what this is about. Oh, but I have questions in here, so let's shake it up and see what's going on. Oh, what's this question here? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, this is a good question. Do you always need an insight to drive the creative brief? I throw it to the floor. What do you guys think? Do you always need an insight to drive the creative brief?
Yes.
I think so. Because if you don't understand the people and the why and the behavior, your argument will fall apart when it comes to creative production, budgets, things like that. And the best work always does. Like, I mean, it's just a true thing, and it just helps everything be real. That's when you see something that matters and is interesting and cultural versus, ew, what did they think with that? That's to me the difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like with insight, it's this not like known truth that anybody can head nod that hears it. So you don't necessarily, I mean, it depends also, like, what is the audience that you're trying to reach, but it's a head nod. It's definitely something that is kind of undeniable about this world.
I will be devil's advocate here, and it's my journey as a strategist, because I for me, like, yes, insights, but also sometimes I think there's some magic in really random ideas that don't make any sense, that come from nowhere. Whether you're taking a shower or you're watching like an art film, and like just like a seed of an idea just pops out of nowhere. And sometimes, like in that instance, it's better to lead with the idea than to be beholden by the insight. And the reason why I say that is sometimes when we focus solely on like human behaviors or like universal truths, there can be a tendency for our work to be the same almost, because it's coming from the same starting place. And that's why I look at brands like Gucci, where I'm like, whoa, like how do they even think of that? And a lot of it's just like mood boarding and randomness and like trips to wherever. So, I mean, I think as strategists, it's important to ground yourself in insight, but also create that tiny opening and gap for like random ideas, because you never know.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I would argue that that moment was an insight, but
That's true.
But let's get into technicality here. No, I'm just kidding. I think that the one thing though for oh shit, I just lost it. This is not the magic trick. Sorry, I'm on some like weird drugs right now. It'll come back. When it comes back, I'll say it again. Now it's a lull. Sorry, guys.
You're good. So Xander, pull one more out of that magic box of yours.
All right, I'm gonna my antique roadshow box here. Oh wait. Oh, okay. Oh, this is actually a relevant question because Puna just brought it up. What's the difference between facts versus insights? So for me, I'll use the base kind of straightforward example here. To me, like facts are things that you can observe in the world, and the insights are the why behind those observations. So like really on a basic level, you know, people love to take selfies because they see themselves as personal brands. People taking selfies is an observation. That is a fact. Unfortunately, it's a fact. The insight is that they see themselves as personal brands. And so when you think about like the Museum of Ice Cream, you know, like, okay, like on a certain level, yes, really clever idea. People love to take selfies. Let's build like a super Instagrammable environment, but they also see themselves as personal brands. So within that experience, let's offer them a personal photographer who's gonna follow them around and take their pictures. So there is a way of like operating both from observations and insights. I find that when you operate from the insights, that's when you can really speak to your audience in a really intuitive way.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember what I was going to say. It was that I find that having some kind of tools to like get yourself out of your head is helpful. And sometimes things like creating a brief, it seems daunting, but so is just coming up with a great insight. So like having ways that you can like get out of that. And like with content strategy, that's actually the thing I feel like you use, Xander, it was like this thing, it was the brand book that that I was suggesting people create in order to get ideas and generate ideas for Instagram content. Mm-hmm. But you took that and was like, let me like use this as a way to communicate and to start understanding like how do we position ourselves, and so like having these tools are, you don't always have to use them, but they're great to use to get yourself out of your head, because as creatives we do that to ourselves. We're very like in our heads.
It's very stressful.
Yeah.
All right. Should we head into the Q&A portion?
Yes.
Do it. All right. We had a really great question from Haley. So Haley, do you want to join on video and ask your question?
Sure. There we go. Hi. This has been lovely. Megan, I really was interested in how you were delineating between agency strategy work as well as in-house, and then, you know, I guess like on the loose strategy. I'd love to hear a little bit more from you guys all about that, as well as what are the kind of parts of account planning components that exist in agency strategy that don't exist in other strategy. I'm basically thinking a lot about how my work and the composite of my work maps onto like the strategy, like the, you know, the formal definitions of strategy in different spaces.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you talk about account planning, that's really the discipline that sort of started strategy along, like I think about 30 years ago. So a lot of it's the same stuff. It's just very heavy in the sense that it's very fixed. It's very like your job is the creative brief and then you stand back. So looking into account planning as a discipline is kind of looking at the origin of strategy. But I think your question is really, and call me out if I'm wrong, is you're trying to understand how strategy works within these different places. And I think when you look at a big agency, strategy, that job is to really serve the creative process for larger marketing campaigns and really be able to deliver insight and direction to be able to do that. When you're working on a client side, you're basically like how your main job is, and this is what I did at Nike, was how does a brand stay relevant with its audience? So you're less campaign focused and more like we have to stay cool. And you know, every brand has a strategy or an insights department, but their job is really to understand how their audience is really taking the product. So they spend a lot more time on product development and really understanding how people use things. And then when it's strategy in that third bucket that you mentioned, like myself, like right now I consult. So I work directly with brands, and then I also work directly with agencies. So what I do is I come in and it's always strategy, but I work a little bit differently. So say I'm working with a brand, my job is to kind of do all the strategy jobs in one personally, or well, I have a team, but we deliver that work basically like how do they go to market? Who do they talk to? And we do a lot of research and background on that. Whereas if I was in an agency, it might be, hey, we just have a specific campaign, like a holiday campaign. And then you develop this strategy for that. So the difference is really scale and like how far it's going to go. I'm curious though, what is your current job title?
I'm a consultant as
Okay.
well, doing freelance consulting, but my background is a combination of product strategy and management consulting. And then I grew up in like marketing. So I end up always pitching stuff that feels like it's around story and marketing and doing a lot of strategy, but it's really sort of an amalgamation of things and out of the box. So I'm constantly trying to figure out how I can view what I do more systematically. In terms of understanding like what people are used to working with and what I'm doing. So like right now I'm doing probably what you'd call a campaign for a client, but it started because I came on board to help them with their product strategy.
Right. And I think what you're calling out is important for everyone, which is strategy. It used to be very fixed, as I mentioned, with account planning. And now we're sort of these hybrids where we're moving between, like, I'm telling, you know, I have a client that's going to launch a hotel and I'm helping them, you know, work on their creative storytelling interior. Like that wouldn't technically be a strategic job in a marketing agency, but it's at the end of the day, it's like human truth. What's the goal? And really creating the right plan to do so. So I think it's less being fixed on what you are and more like, I am somebody who's great at solving problems. I'm here to, you know, launch things. And it sounds like you're already naturally doing that. So I feel like to describe yourself as a strategist who can do both product and marketing is a great way of encompassing what you do. That's really easy for people to understand. Because I think that's the other part, right, Xander and Puno, it's like communicating our value really easily to someone so they know how to hire us to do the work. And that's where I get really nimble. I'm like, wow, you're bringing a product to the US and you have no idea where it should launch. Okay, I'll figure that out is usually just my brain going, and that's where it comes into really customizing. Whereas previously it was very fixed and now you're developing per job, per project, per client strategy. And that's exciting for people because they get what they need and you don't have to stay fixed in this idea of what kind of strategist you are. Because you're probably doing content, you're probably doing brand, you're doing it all. So I hope that's helpful.
And to build off of that, I think I wish there was like a textbook definition or like a vocabulary list of like, here are all the terms that us as an industry are gonna use. It's kind of all over the place. So really you can define how you want to be defined and how you want to be perceived. And it's both like, you know, what your title is, but more so the process. So when you're taking on new clients, explaining what the process is like working with you and how you as a strategist are going to help their brand in whatever way achieve whatever goal. Explain what the process is. It doesn't matter if they see you as a creative strategist, experiential consultant, whatever it is. I think if they understand the process, that's almost more important. Yeah.
And I also think going back to what, you know, the core of a good brief is, what is the problem we're solving? Because if you can always identify that, you have some place to ground yourself, because they may not even know why they're hiring you. They just know they like need to launch something. So your job is to really go and say, like with this client particularly, I was like, wow, you know, I feel like that we could have a stronger visual storytelling. And like, you kind of go in and it's kind of like looking at a closet and you're like, I know what's wrong here. And then really creating that custom project for that to solve that problem. And to Xander's point, explaining how you're going to do that. That's the key, because there's a lot of questions here of like articulating personal value and how to communicate yourself to a prospective job or client. Your job is to be empathetic, figure out what the problem is, and then show them a plan forward. And you get to make that because you're a good thinker. You already have it. There's no textbook that's going to tell you how to do it. You get to do it your own way. And just being really honest with the client, not that you're winging it, because you're not winging it. You're just creating something really unique for them. But being true to the problem is really important, because then you won't derail. You'll really stay in where you need to be. So.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And it sounds like in what both of you said that you often are actually, whether the client thinks they know what the problem is or not, that you actually are really helping them to define what the problem is.
Always.
Absolutely.
Like they come to you with what the problem is and you ask them 20 questions to get to the real problem. And then you, and honestly, there's this kind of belief in like agency culture or the creative industry is that clients are always wrong, or clients are quote unquote stupid. That's actually not the case. Oftentimes clients have really great ideas and they've been with their brands for a very long time. So they have this like knowledge that you don't have. Oftentimes they have the answer, they just don't realize it. So you just have to ask them enough questions and interrogate the brief or whatever the problem is, and it will reveal itself. You just need to listen carefully and then reflect it back to them in as succinct language as possible in a sentence. And they will be like, whoa, you get it. Some strategy magic.
And then you, to Puno's point, you write it down and you use that and you go, remember, we left this room. The problem is this. This is what we're solving. You write it down. And then to my fourth point in the leave behind, you have to remind people what the problem was the entire process. Because 3-4 weeks in, they'll forget that assumption or they'll forget that agreed upon problem. And then you'll be like, no, remember, that's why we're doing this. That's why we're doing this. Again, nanny skills, redirect.
And part of that nanny skills too, just one thing I want to add, because a question that I always like to ask prospective clients is, what's keeping you up at night? Because part of strategy, yes, is about thinking, but also it's about managing emotions. And also being there for people as humans. So, you know, whether I'm working with like a mid-level manager, whatever that might be, like they might be so stressed out by, you know, wanting to achieve success on this project to prove to their boss that they should get promoted, or they really want to figure out this one marketing issue and they really want to connect with this audience, whatever that is, like there is always a problem that people are tossing and turning over. If you can find out what that is, and then connect that with the brief that they've given you, like you're going to be able to tackle that problem, but also like show up as a person for them to make their lives easier. And that's when like bonds are created, and that's really important.
Awesome. And we also have a question from Colleen. Colleen, do you want to come on camera?
Hey. So my question is, how do you make space to have those hard discussions or ask those hard questions? You know, bringing up things like diversity, inclusion, or even what you were talking about earlier, Megan, with like the racism or sexism that may be happening. How do you create a comfortable space with your clients to have them open up about those things? Or
yeah, That's a great point. And I think what I think back to the first project I had with Xander is we didn't know each other. We walked into Porsche headquarters, which was really intimidating. And we just came in and we were ourselves and we were warm and we asked and we introduced people, and you bring that real heart and empathy. And you come in, you're like, hi, Megan, and so excited to be here. And you just really establish that rapport that you're in this together. And the other thing I do is, and Xander as well, like we talk about collaboration with these meetings. When we're in these meetings, we say, this is a place for us to collaborate. We set the tone for everyone's voice to be heard. And, when you're kind of in the beginning of your career, it's hard to be like, whoa, am I going to be the person to call out the boss for being racist? Like, that's not it. It's really more like having the conversations and be like, I just want to really acknowledge, and another great way of saying it is, culturally right now, using good old culture, you can kind of be like, things are changing in the world. And I just want to make sure this project, so you're really just coming from a place of openness. And then I'll kick it over to Xander, but the best thing is just being really honest and having great support on your side to say, this is the kind of this is the professional level we like to be at. And then have that freedom and that trust. And sometimes they're hard meetings, but that's okay, because the project will be better for it. You just have to kind of be brave and go for it.
Yeah, and I would say those conversations are always uncomfortable, especially in the beginning, and you just have to go through that discomfort and you'll start to be more comfortable. But I think, to Megan's point, it's about building a genuine rapport and then also framing things in terms of the goals of the work. So if the goal of the work is to be cool, to go viral, or to connect with Gen Z, whatever that might be, if you want to talk about diversity and inclusivity and representation, like talk about why these populations are important to acknowledge and reflect in the work that you're doing. It's helpful to find statistics, data, whatever that might be, to show their purchasing power or like how relevant they are. That never hurts. But always frame things like towards goals and like try to rationalize, like come less from a place of emotion and more of like, this is like my rational recommendation as a strategist, and here's why. And then I also say, don't be emotional, but I also think it's good to sometimes, if you're an empathetic person, just be like, hey guys, like, I just want to have a moment of realness here, like, and just talk about it. And maybe it's not a group conversation, maybe it's like a sidebar with the client or another person that you feel more comfortable with, and trying to build advocacy that way, and getting them to support you and believe in what you're thinking, before you bring it to the larger group. But, I say it's, especially the times that we're in now, it's important to stand up for what you believe in and what you believe is right. And, if you have to work with a client who doesn't want to do the right thing or doesn't like believe in that, like, if you can afford to, like, don't work with that client. So.
Yeah, it's important, because you're going to run into those folks, but if the project will never usually turn out well if there is a difference in ideals and values. So yeah, just finding that commonality. Yeah.
Well, I think we are all out of time, but thank you, Xander, and thank you, Megan, so much for being here and for telling us more about what strategists do. And thanks, Puno, as well. I do want to note that we're going to be sending an email after this that has that PDF that Megan put together about how to approach a content brief or a creative brief. And it also will have a feedback form. So if you want to learn about more positions in the creative field, we would love to hear from you, kind of what job positions you want to hear about. And we're also going to send you a code for 10% off any I Love Creatives course. It is our last night for enrollment for all of our courses until November. So if you've been considering one of them, this is a pretty great deal that we offer now. So yeah, it's I Love Strategy is the code. And thank you guys so much. This is really fun.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.